This video contains sensitive content. Viewer discretion is advised.
There's been times in my life when I was a grown man past the age of 35 and I was like, no one wants to hear me cry. No one wants to hear me complain. I'm successful. I got a wife. I got kids. Where can I go to just cry my eyes out and say, God, I don't have it? Now, what I didn't realize is that I have ADHD. We talk about it so casually now, but literally the last word in ADD or ADHD is disorder. I was literally thought I was going crazy. And all of it, only thing I could think of was the best thing to do is end it all so I don't have to live like this anymore. The point is, if I've ever said anything that's been impactful or life-altering for you, it wouldn't have been said in this season of my life if I hadn't.
This is The Deep End with Lecrae.
Everybody in here has 3 to 4 core things that they're better at within themselves than everything else they do. We are spending way too much time and energy trying to be good at things that we can't be good at. It's just real talk. It is against everything you hear from everybody. I get it. I understand how I sit on this island very by myself in the ecosystem. Let me say this. Think about the 1,000 people that are the most famous and successful in the world, and they all have only one thing in common. They've hunted everything besides that one talent and spent every minute in their lives on that one talent. That's their common trait.
I actually resonate with a lot of what Gary Vee said in that clip. And at the same time, I think it's important to recognize and realize that, man, we are not in control as much as we like to think we are. The scripture says, man proposes, God disposes. I totally agree with him in the space and area of him saying, like, we put a lot of energy into things that we're not good at, or we're trying to fix things that is just really outside the realm of our capabilities. I think that's great. Actually, I don't think there's any reason for me to be spending my every waking moment trying to be an NBA player. I think that's a waste of my time. And I also think that punting everything and diving into the one thing that I'm good at is not a recipe for success either. I think it could be conventional wisdom. And I think that's the best you have when you're functioning in a world outside of a Christian worldview. The best you have is conventional wisdom. And I mean, that's what Solomon did, was he grabbed the best of conventional wisdom around the world and applied it. I don't think that wisdom is exclusive to the people of God. I think that God allows for folks to be able to obtain wisdom from just life. And really the idea of wisdom is really manipulating reality in a way that is fruitful, right? That's what wisdom is. So what if you can walk into a restaurant and order every single one of your favorite meals from the same restaurant? That'd be like unheard of, right? Well, I don't have a restaurant recommendation for you that can do that, but I have a place where you can get all the soul food that you need. Literally food for your soul. And that's the B-side. A place where the content from the people who can speak to your soul, help you grow, help you to wrestle with the hard things in life, all exist in one place. And that's the BSIDE app. So the BSIDE app is where you get to hear incredible content from people like Tim Ross, myself, and countless others. Some incredible talks, some incredible deep dives into things that are life transforming, scriptural resources, devotionals, conversations that you are not get anywhere else. They all exist on the B-side. So we need you to go there because it's the only place you're going to get everything you need and one stop. The sun comes up in the morning and it goes down. And if you realize that it does this consistently at the same time, you can manipulate that reality to grow crops or to tell time or to get warm. There's just but that's what wisdom is. It's understanding what's happening and like taking advantage of that for the benefit of yourself and others. I do think that a lot of the motivational podcasters and people out there are kind of selling, conventional wisdom as if it is infallible. Like it's a one size fits all. And if you do this, then this will happen. That's just not reality. It's just not. There are two people who can work just as hard at the same thing and they're equally talented at it. And one of them will lose and one of them will win. That's just reality. The NBA is full of the most talented basketball players on the planet, and all of them will not get a championship ring. Even though they practiced, they got up early, they worked hard, they did everything they could, they're not all going to be able to get that championship ring because that's just the way of the world. You just don't have that type of control. I won 2 Grammys this year. Everyone in the category worked hard. They crafted art. They did their best. Why didn't they win them? They don't have control over that, right? And I didn't have control over it. And so I think there is something even more powerful in relinquishing control to God, in the idea of doing your best and letting God do the rest, in the idea of having open hands and saying, God, my hands are open and your plan is much better than mine, right? I remember when I first became a Christian, and I remember a college leader telling us, hey, do me a favor, get out a piece of paper, and I want you to write your 5-year plan out when you get out of school. And we all got our pen and paper out, and we just wrote down what our goals were. Like in the next 5 years, this is where I see myself. This is this, this is this. And then he said, all right, hold your paper up. And we all held our paper up. And he said, crumble it up and throw it away. And he said, that is what you have to be prepared for when you follow God. He said, now get out another piece of paper and hold it up. And we held it up, and he said, submit that to God. Submit that blank sheet of paper to God. And the scary part is God may say singleness, or God may say a career in this particular region of the world, or God may say you are going to lose feeling in your legs, or we just don't have control, but we do have comforting reality that he'll never leave us nor forsake us, that our needs will be provided for, that he has our best interests in mind, that all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That's the hard part. I mean, we want to be, gurus and tell people if you just do A, then B will happen. And it's proverbial. It's like the Proverbs. The Proverbs are, they're literally that. They're proverbial. This is just conventional wisdom. These are things that have the probability of happening. They're not guarantees. They're not prescriptions. They are descriptions of what can happen if you do this. Or I guess in a sense they are prescriptions, but the point is they're not literal. It's not like, if you do A, then B will happen, right? They're guideposts. They're kind of this idea that if you follow this is the fruit that will generally happen. If you plant these seeds in this season, you'll have a crop. But why do famines happen? Because we're not in control. Why do we lose loved ones? We're not in control. Why do we get illnesses? And why do we get laid off? We're not in control. We've seen lots of careers stop short. We've seen lots of dreams fall short. And the thing about it is man, when you can let go and you can admit you don't have control, that's the most healthiest place to be. A lot of us misconstrue the verse, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We use that out of context all the time. We'll we get in the weight room. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens. I mean, what Paul was referring to in the context was, I've had little, I've had a lot, but I can do all things through Christ. What he's talking about is contentment. Now that's the superpower, is contentment. That's supernatural. Contentment is like, God, you're in control and I'm going to work hard, and maybe I have a lot or maybe I have a little, but I can do all things through Christ. Whether I have to have nothing or whether I have a lot, I can be who you've called me to be through Christ who strengthens me. I can find contentment. I can find a place of peace without having to have control. Control breeds anxiety. Control is a breeding ground for disappointment and anxiety. And the illusion that we have control makes us think we have power. When we think we have power, we're overconfident in our own strength. And what Paul is saying, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, but in my own strength, I'm trash. Matter of fact, he boasts in his weakness. He's like, I'm weak, but where I'm weak, Christ is strong. And I think that's the illusion that we fall under consistently, is that we're strong because of our natural abilities or our will or whatever. I mean, look at King Nebuchadnezzar. Man thought he had it all figured out, was the leader of leaders, the king of the land. And just like that, God snaps his fingers and this man is running around eating grass, like he loses his mental capabilities. And so he had to come to the reality and come to grips with the reality that he's not strong. He doesn't have it all together. And I bring up King Neb because I can relate. I grew up in a disenfranchised community. I come from a grandmother, who had to work hard and scrap, a mother who had to work hard as a single parent and scrap. And so this is the model that was set for me. Like, you just work hard and you figure it out. What I didn't understand was there was so much trauma because of a lack of acknowledging weakness, a lack of acknowledging where they could not stand strong. And so there was the inability to find healing and be vulnerable because it wasn't allowed. First of all, it's not like my grandmother had access to therapy to be able to talk through these things. But now here I stand, and I tried to carry out this concept of just being strong, of willpower, plowing my way through. And if I just apply myself 100%, man, I'm going to make it. I'm going to hit that mark. And God broke me like King Neb. I had never experienced, people say, oh, I'm depressed. I had never really experienced depression until I got hit with a situational, major depressive episode where, candidly, like, if I didn't have family, I don't know if I would have had the will to go on. Like, I was just thinking about the pain it would cause them. That was the only thing keeping me from, doing some real damage. I had no will to be here, and I couldn't control it, right? It wasn't like I could just say, all right, shake this off. Come on, here we go. It's literally like being trapped in your own mind. It's like if someone handcuffs you, you can't get out those cuffs. It's like my brain was handcuffed. And you can't explain it to people. They'd have to experience it. But I hope no one ever has to experience that, because it was the most painful situation ever. Now, what I didn't realize is that I have ADHD, which is genetic. We talk about it so casually now, but literally the last word in ADD or ADHD is disorder. Like, it's a disorder. And that alone says, hey, this is a weakness that you're going to have to work through. With ADD, if someone tells me make 6 rights, 2 lefts, and turn left at the sign, I'm not going to remember any of it. I've never been able to get directions from somebody and remember it just like that, not without taking medication. And so because of ADD, I'm also on the spectrum for depression and anxiety. So it puts me at risk. And I honestly believe People in the scriptures battle with this very thing. I think David dealt with major depressive disorder. I think Elijah ran into the woods and said, just let me die, right? I think Nebuchadnezzar was struck with literally, probably a schizophrenic episode, something along those lines. We just didn't have those terminologies, right? But we do now. And what I'm saying is that, man, I have never been weaker in my life than when I experienced that major depressive episode. And the opposite end of depression is anxiety. So now I started to tip into anxiety because my brain was saying, we're going to be stuck like this forever. We're going to always be depressed. It's going to suck. And I don't want to live. And oh my God. And I started freaking out, which tipped the scales to acute anxiety, to where I couldn't even sleep, right? To where I was afraid of traffic lights, y'all. So I say that to say, like, it put me in such a weak space and weak place. There was nowhere for me to go but God. Like, either I curl up in a fetal position and just die, or I'm going to have to trust that God can do something outside of my own power. There was no motivate myself out of this. There was no just bootstrap it and trust in your strengths and lean into your strengths and you'll be fine. There was none of that. It was only admit you're weak, ask the Lord to send people to help. God sent therapists and doctors, experts. I mean, this is all what I call like a means of grace, right? Like, I think it's a means of grace that God would allow me to exist in this time period where I can have access to doctors and medicine and therapists to be able to navigate through those particular things. And it's made me stronger. Let me tell you how. My weakness has allowed me to rely on the Lord more. Relying on the Lord more has transformed my mind. There's something that neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is where your brain literally can adapt and adjust and change, right? There's a plasticity, a plasticness to your brain. So you're not stuck. If you work at it and expose it to a consistency of thought or perspective, your brain changes. Well, all neuroplasticity is something that Paul told us in the scriptures. He said, renew your mind, right? So a mind renewal, God has already provided us a means to do what neuroscientists are figuring out today. And what my weakness allowed me to do was to say, I don't have it. God, renew my mind. And so with a godly therapist, with the scriptures, my mind began to be renewed and I was able to see things from a different perspective and become a different person. But now, because I'm weak, admittedly in this area, it's made me strong in dependency on God. My empathy levels are much higher. I did not have good empathy for other people because I thought, why don't he just get himself out of this situation? Like, quit crying, toughen up. Now I realize everybody can't do that. I'm more empathetic. I'm trying to be like Jesus with the woman at the well and hear her case and appeal to her. That's the beauty of this. And so humility is not passiveness. Humility is an acceptance of the reality that you don't have the control that you think you do. Humility is not cowardice. Humility is understanding the position that you're in, right? Like, oh, I am not God and I've got to trust God in this particular situation. I polled some wiser, older people about this concept of, just weakness and strength. Here's some of the thoughts that were given to me by a lot of different great minds, right? One of the thoughts was the reality that Jesus literally made himself weak for the sake of others. So us trying to be strong all the time is actually antithetical to the gospel. It's antithetical to the character and person of Jesus. He made himself weak for the sake of others. He came to earth as a baby. He needed to be breastfed, y'all. Someone had to burp him. This is God literally having to be burped And I don't know how much weaker you are, right? He puts himself not in any family, but the family of people that don't have means. So he made himself poor and vulnerable as an example, because that's who we are literally on this planet. He walks the earth needing to eat. He fasts, making himself weak so that he can show us that the way you fight evil is not through just being a super tough person and shooting your proverbial shots at the devil, but he fought the enemy's attacks with the truth of God, right? That's how he fought back, not by being Mr. Tough Guy, but fought back with the truth of God. And then he made himself weak to the point that he allowed himself to be mocked, ridiculed, and killed. He hung on a cross naked. It doesn't get more humble than that. A lot of times you see the crosses with the little cloth over. That's not how they did you in Rome. They did you naked so as to disgrace you completely. And to show your body parts for a Jew is the ultimate form of disgrace. So he made himself weak for our sake. One of the things that was said to me is the more successful you become, the more broken you should become. It's just the concept and the idea that, man, you will take heed lest you fall. You'll begin to trust in your own self, your own press clippings, your own abilities as you gain success. And we see the stories in scripture of Naaman, a man of the soil, who got too arrogant, got too cocky, and, God struck him with leprosy because he thought it was him, not God, who put him in that position. It's always God who put you in that. You didn't make yourself strong. You didn't give yourself that talent. Like, all that was given to you by God. So give it back to him and admit, without you, I'm nothing. Humility is not a personality trait, right? Humility doesn't mean you don't acknowledge your achievements or, compliments. It's just the intentional recognition that God is everything and that you are nothing without him. That's really what it is. It's not something that you say, well, this never happened. It's just you understanding how it happened. And how it was you working with the strength that God gave you to do something and him blessing your work, the work of your hands. We've all heard the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That takes the admittance that you don't have it all. We see Moses in the scriptures weak, right, during battle. And he needed Aaron and Hur to hold his arms up. It's a moment of vulnerability. You can't do this by yourself. Jethro had to say, Moses, you don't got what it takes to do this alone. It's so American of us to have this idea of rugged individuality. It's just so American of us, man. One of my favorite shows on Netflix is Alone, where they drop people off in the middle of the woods and they just have to survive. They always end up tapping out, and the people who make it to the end are near death. None of them ever get to the end of the show like, that was a piece of cake. Let's do it again. No, they nearly die because they're alone. Because they got to do all the hunting, all the building, all the cooking, all the fishing, all the gathering. And God even says it's not good for man to be alone. So just this whole rugged individuality idea that we're obsessed with is just pride on steroids. Realistically, we'd be a healthier society and culture if we could admit our weaknesses and staff them. That's how I've gotten where I've gotten in life, is staffing my weaknesses. I got to admit I'm weak in this particular area. When it comes to my live show, I have never, I won't say never, but rare in the last 5 years, I have not touched the software it takes to put it together. Hey man, this is my idea. Here's what I like to see. Here's the music. Da 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 da. I ain't done none of that engineering because nowadays I'm not good at it all. I can't do it all. Right? So I'm not trying to give off the idea that I do every aspect of everything. I own the fact that I'm weak in particular areas and I need other people because collectively we're stronger. Another one of the things that I think it's healthy for us to remember is, one of my leaders said this. He said, don't ever trust your flesh. You're never too old to fall. 50-year-old men plus fall more than younger. Power, money, and sex kills us. Usually young men is sex, midlife is money, and the old is power. I mean, that's crazy, right? I mean, look at David. He was in his 50s when he falls for Bathsheba. You're never too old to fall. And if you get to a place in life where you're like, oh, I've arrived. I'm 30, got my career, everything's good, I'm good. No, your flesh is coming for you. Sin is crouching at your door and it wants to devour you. You don't have it all together. Your rugged individuality is not going to save you. You know, self-awareness is an asset. You got to be honest to yourself about your strengths and weaknesses. Men want to be great at things they need to pass on. Stop trying to be someone else instead of who God made you to be. That's where I agree with Gary Vee. A lot of us spend too much time trying to be great on things we need to say, you know, I can't do it all. I just can't do it all. And that's not my strength. That's not where I soar. You know, a lot of us take tests, you know, strength finders and Enneagrams, and I'm not opposed to those things. I'm opposed to us finding our identity in those things. And I'm not opposed to you trying to look for where your strengths are. I'm opposed to people keying in on the strength part and not paying attention to other people's strengths and knowing that, hey, that's theirs, not yours. So you need them, right? Like you being an achiever on the Enneagram test does not mean that you don't need people, right? That's not what that means. If anything, it means that's where you tend to zero in on, and it makes you blind to the other areas you need help in. What we always say in my friendship groups is we need each other to point out our blind spots, because we all have them. And if you don't think you have a blind spot, that's it right there. Pride. That's your blind spot. If you're like, I don't have a blind spot. Yes, you do. It's pride. That's it right there. We all have blind spots. We all have areas where we're not seeing, our perception is off. And we need other people in our lives to show us like, yo, you're really weak here. Now, some of us don't like to admit that because we just struggle with admitting our weaknesses. And I'm not telling you got to be as vulnerable publicly as I've been. I do that because it's not a stretch for me. I've been doing it for a long time, and I know I have a public platform and it helps people. But everybody doesn't have to do that. But you got to do it with somebody. Somebody's got to know your weaknesses in order to help you be a better person. We need a combination of accountability, vulnerability, and submission. You have to keep people in your life who are fully integrated. Accountability, vulnerability, and submission. You know what an authority is? An authority is a person who is in charge, right? But how does one become an authority? You become an authority on something because you submitted. Right? If I'm an authority on music, it's because I had to submit to the process of learning about music. If I'm an authority of the law, it's because I had to submit to the process of learning law from someone else. If I'm an authority on the scriptures, it's because I sat under a rabbi and learned through submission about the scriptures. You cannot be an authority unless you've been submissive. Right? That's the whole idea. So if you are beating your chest as if you're some kind of superhero, authoritative figure, and you don't grasp the concept of submission, you're not really a good authority. You're not a good leader. If you're a husband and the Bible's calling you to be a leader in your home, it's not calling you to be a leader in terms of being a tyrant. It's saying, hey, lead in submission. Like, hey, how about you submit to her idea about what y'all should do for this particular situation in a home? My wife tells me, hey, I don't think this is a good idea for school. I don't beat my chest and say, hey, I'm the leader and I decide what happens for school here. No, I lead in humility and say, that's a great idea, sweetheart. Tell me more about it, right? I lead in service. I lead in being able to, the Bible says, submit yourselves to one another. I lead in submission so that she sees like, well, he's willing to bend, I can bend. But who wants to submit to a tyrant? Nobody. No one. So a part of, being a follower of Christ is like being weak and absorbing weakness. In our society, weakness is seen as a negative because what it says is that you'll be prey and that you'll be vulnerable to be eaten alive. But what Jesus is showing us is that weakness is the opportunity to trust in the power of God, is the opportunity to trust in a higher source. Weakness is the opportunity to learn, and that learning makes you strong, right? You got to go into the gym and talk to a trainer and say, I'm weak. so that you can become strong. But a lot of us don't want to admit we're weak. So we're never going to be strong. We're just walking around as a facade. We're fake strong. And we get exposed every day. That's why so much money is invested online on seeing people exposed, because we're all parading ourselves as strong folks. No one, we get excited to see some massive celebrity take a fall in society because they've touted themselves as strong. But if we portrayed ourselves honest, as look, I don't have it all together. I might fall off the stage tomorrow. I might mess up this today. Then it's a different story. But when you tout yourself as strong and powerful and rich and wealthy, as soon as we find out you got a tax problem, we on your head. Ha! Bankrupt. Well, you touted yourself as something as other than what you are. Instead of saying, I'm actually weak in the area of finances, and I need to go learn. I need to submit myself to an authority or be honest with somebody who can help me navigate this. Now I'm not in that tax trouble, right? I'm in a different ball game. Here's one of my favorites. Determine if you want to be rich or famous, and decide which one is more important. Financial freedom is far more important than being known by people when you're already known by God. When I say financial freedom, I'm not saying be rich, right? What I'm saying is living your life always trying to keep up with the Joneses, to portray this image of notoriety. And it's really fame. You're chasing fame. It's stupid. You're trying to impress people and look like you are more valuable than they are when we all have the same value. We're all fearfully and known by God. So spend your money as a steward. Create opportunities for you to do things for others. That's what financial freedom is for me. Is man, do I have the ability to give X amount of dollars to said organization, or help so-and-so get this happening, or help these folks who are dealing with poverty? Or am I too busy buying Rolls Royces so that I can look like I have notoriety and so people can turn their head? I'm not saying anything wrong with a Rolls Royce. If you got it and that's what but it's all about the intention, right? It's the motive. And then lastly, what I say this all the time is true identity is received, not achieved. You are not what you do or your role in society. You're who God says you are. So if you're spending all your time, effort, and energy trying to prove to the world that you're valuable, trying to prove to the world that you're strong, your identity is too wrapped up in how people perceive you. I'd submit to you, your identity is too wrapped up in how you perceive you and not wrapped up enough in how God sees you. He sees you as his child who is wonderfully and fearfully made. He sees you as someone who does not have to have it all together. In this moment, I'm speaking to, a lot of my lonely people out there who feel like they have to have it all together and they can't have a shoulder to cry on. God is always available for you. There's been times in my life when I was a grown man past the age of 35, and I was like, no one wants to hear me cry. No one wants to hear me complain. I'm successful by the world standards. I've achieved this. I got a wife. I got kids. Where can I go to just cry my eyes out and say, God, I don't have it? Nobody wants to hear you cry, grown man. Nobody wants to hear you complain, man of means. But God says, I do. Come to me. Come to me. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. Lay it down. Come to me. I know you don't have it all together. They may think you do. I know you don't. I know that your vulnerability may cause them to judge you. I'm not. I love you. And I'm talking to you out there who does not have the freedom or the ability, who do not have the freedom or the ability to just admit you're weak, to just say, God, I don't have it. Psalm 23 is for you. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Like, his rod and his staff can comfort you. even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you don't have to fear evil. Not because you're strong and you have it all together, but because you're weak and you admit you need a shepherd. And Jesus, he's not just the chief shepherd. He's not just a good shepherd. He wants to be your shepherd. So let him. There's this whole notion that medication and therapy are in many ways unchristlike or ungodly, and that we are depending on the works of the flesh and not the work of the spirit to do some transformation in our lives. And I know that that's a real thing because I felt that way when I experienced my, depressive episode and my severe anxiety. 1, 2, 3. I was on 4 medications, 4 of them, but I didn't want to take one of them initially, and it made my mental health deteriorate. I can only imagine if I would have, 1, gone to therapy, and 2, taken medication during that time period, that I would not have some of the struggles that I have today. So now I have a very gentle mental. First of all, what I want people to understand is the idea that you shouldn't take medication or go to therapy because you're a Christian is a lie from the pit of hell. Do not buy into that. Therapy and medication are options. I'm not saying they are solutions. I'm saying they are options that do not make you any less godly. But the goal is health. The goal is to not say, I don't want to be on medication because it makes me look weak or feel weak. The goal is not about weakness or strength. The goal is health. It's like braces. The goal is straight teeth. Put the braces on. It's like glasses. I wear my contacts or my glasses every day. Why? Because the goal is sight. The goal is not to be able to say that I have perfect vision. What does that do for anybody? The goal is for me to see so I can do the work that God has called me to do. And for me during that time period, the goal is mental health. And even to this day, I still take my ADD medication. And sometimes, another medication if I'm struggling because my brain is racing and I got to sleep. I mean, if I don't have to take it, great, because obviously I don't necessarily want to have to put supplements. It's not like my body is craving, chemicals. God didn't design us to crave chemicals, but at the same time, God didn't design us to wear glasses, pieces of glass that we're seeing through every day, right? That's not what he designed us for. But some of us have to do that. And why? Because the goal is health. And what I would say to some folks out there, some people have heart conditions. Would you tell a person with a heart condition to not take their blood pressure medicine, or they had a couple strokes, you tell them not to take that medication? Would you tell them to not go to see a doctor because of their heart condition? I think you would think that would be crazy. That would be asinine to tell someone, do not. That's not godly. You need to just pray for your heart. Don't take medication. Don't see a doctor. I think part of the problem for us is that we have misconstrued the brain with the spirit. The brain is not the spirit. Your brain is not your spirit. It's not your soul. And honestly, that's more of a secular mindset. A lot of secularists think that if we can just preserve the brain and put it in another body, or somehow keep the brain preserved, then we can keep the human alive. That's not biblical. We're alive because God breathed into us. We're alive because supernaturally we are functioning because of God. Our soul, our capability to feel and emote and to dream about things beyond makes us not animals. Animals are not thinking like, man, how can I be a better lion? I probably should build a lion kingdom. They're not. They're functioning off of instinct. And that's the way they were designed. But God has made us in his likeness and his image, and we dream and we love and we process and we sing and we worship. We are dynamic individuals, and our brain is not our soul. Our brain is an organ in our body, much like our heart or our lungs, that is a part of the wholeness of who we are, that helps us to function. If our heart stops, the body stops functioning, the shell that God put us in stops functioning, and our spirit returns to where it needs to return to. If our brain stops, if our lungs stop, the spirit goes where it needs to go. But the heart is not the human. The brain is not the human. These are organs that God has given us that have dynamics that make us a lot of who we are. So we take care of our brain, people. You take medication for your brain if it's necessary. You take medication for your heart if it's necessary. You go to therapy, physical therapy for your arm because you hurt it. You go to therapy for your brain, right? To help you process. And listen, we don't fully understand the human brain. Like neuroscientists don't even fully understand it. It's dynamic. But how can we? How can you explain sperm and egg creating a whole new life? It's miraculous. We don't fully grasp it. We're finite beings. So we do the best we can with what God has provided us with. So do not buy into the lie that you don't need to take medication or you don't need to go to therapy. That is an option available to you. And if you need it, take it. But do not feel less of a Christian or less spiritual because you did not. Because I would not be sitting here talking to you had I not done it. The way I had to think about it was like a cast. And I needed a cast on my arm so it can heal, so it can function back in normal way. I needed a cast on my brain. And that's what that medication was for me in that period of time. I needed a cast because my brain kept spiraling into depression or into anxiety. I was having disassociation where it was like I was alive, but I felt like I was outside of my body. I was literally thought I was going crazy. And all of it, only thing I could think of was the best thing to do is end it all so I don't have to live like this anymore. And what the medication did was it stabilized me, made me be able to sit in therapy and hear the truth of God and hear who I was and deal with my past and deal with my trauma and get some healing to where little by little, oh, I don't need to take this anymore. I don't need to take this anymore. Or maybe I do need to take this, but whatever. The point is, I wouldn't be here right now. If I've ever said anything that's been impactful or life-altering for you, it wouldn't have been said in this season of my life if I hadn't taken that medication. Some of your favorite people, theologians, leaders, are probably taking medication or have. That's just the reality. And there's nothing unspiritual about that. One of my favorite theologians, Tim Keller, passed away from cancer, and I'm sure in his final days, he was taking medication in hopes to get better, in hopes to heal and to function. And we would not scrutinize him for that. He wasn't less godly. It was a means of grace that God provides to us. Use it, don't abuse it. Don't be dependent on it. Be thankful to God that he provided it. And heal and become who you need to be.